What does that mean for the dollar? What does that mean for Indian rupee versus the dollar? The dollar continues to weaken. And the dollar actually has no choice but to continue to weaken, because if there's anything that will take the US out of this funk, is export competitiveness. And you can only do that with a weaker dollar. So the weaker dollar is coming, a stronger rupee is coming. So as you run your businesses and think about what you should be doing, please start thinking about 41, 42 as the next stop. And you can see that this decline in QE1 and QE2, if there's a QE3, I think it continues to decline from here. At the same time, you've got Europe in a seriously bad way. And I think Europe's problem actually is the euro. Now, the euro was designed a decade and a half ago on a false assumption that if you had to create a market that mirrored the size of the US market of about 250, 300 million people. But actually they did nothing to pull it all together. So you've got today Germany growing at 2%, which is its maximum potential growth rate. You've got Greece, Ireland shrinking at 3% a year. But you've got the same monetary policy for all these countries. So what's the European Central Bank doing? It's raising interest rates at a time when Greece, Portugal, Italy, Spain are effectively in recession. If somebody can explain to me how you can get a country out of recession by raising interest rates, I'd really love to know. At the same time, the currency is strengthening. So European export competitiveness is going down. Tourists will stay away from Greece because it's too expensive, because the euro is getting stronger. So you've got a real problem in Europe. So US will struggle. Europe's going to struggle. Which means you'll have pressure on commodity prices. So commodity prices will continue to come down from here, which in a sense is good for India, although as we were just discussing, despite oil coming down, Jet Airways and airline stocks have come crashing down. So there may not be logic to a lot of this stuff because that's part of the whole madness thing at the moment. But the point is there will be easing of commodity prices for a couple of reasons. Important one, so it's not only about macroeconomic growth being slow, hedge funds are doing less speculation today. And if you look at the oil price spike of 2 years ago to 140 something, a lot of it was speculative activity, where hedge funds, through the futures market, had accumulated 10 times the strategic reserves of the United States of America. That was the kind of speculative activity that we saw, which we're not seeing today. So you will continue to see a decline in commodities from here, which will be good for all of us, good for inflation as well generally. China, which was actually the biggest consumer, 50-60% of most commodities, is also slowing down. So the Chinese authorities have said that our target 9% growth rate for the next decade should now be 8%. So their consumption of commodities will also decline. Therefore, you'll see commodity prices coming down. And at the same time, there's fiscal tightening. So economies will slow down, commodity consumption will decline, and therefore prices will probably come down. The good news in all of this is we're in the right part of the world. We're an emerging economy. We're one of the most attractive emerging economies. And if you look at price earnings multiples, which drive equity values, from their peak pre-crisis, they're now actually extremely attractive. And so we should be thinking about how to take advantage of that. And I think generally what you'll find is the share of India and China of global GDP will continue to rise aggressively from here. as it was in the 1700s when India and China was 50% of global GDP. In the next 25 or 30 years, we will, with China, regain that kind of dominance in global GDP. And I think what's different from the credit crisis that we saw, trade flows continue to be strong. And the central banks obviously are much more alert than they were. So the good news is we're in the emerging markets, central banks are being vigilant. The intra-emerging market trade continues to be very strong. So things not so bad in our part of the world. But no matter what we try and explain away, commodity prices, interest rates, dollars, the movement of emerging markets is a function of flows from FIIs. So it will come down to, do you believe that Franklin Templeton, Fidelity, Capital, whatever, the big guys sitting in London, New York, Tokyo, will they continue to invest in the emerging markets? If you believe they do, markets will go up. If you think that they won't, markets will come down. So you can see this is net flows into emerging markets. And that's the Morgan Stanley index of emerging market equities. Almost 1-for-1 correlation. So whatever you do, it's a bet on whether you think FII flows will happen. My view personally in India, probably not till Q1 calendar next year. Flows are unlikely to show up. So the pressure that we're seeing today, yesterday, day before, is the absence of FII flows. So those are just sort of broadly the themes. If Tirthankar, I can turn it over to you to talk a little bit about what's happening in India.